The purpose of this video is to give everyone a refresher on how to use virtualization through the VMware Workstation virtualizing client. There are other ones like Oracle for VirtualBox. Unfortunately, this will not cover that, but the process is similar. So let's go over what we need first. All right, we're going to need a computer that's capable of virtualization, something with a lot of RAM, or at least a capable processor, something over 4 cores would be preferable. We'll need to enable virtualization in the BIOS through something called Intel Virtualization Technology, or AMD if you have an AMD style processor. The Ryzen is a good example of the AMD-V virtualization style processor support. You'll also need Virtual Station or VMware Workstation. The current version right now is 15, 14, and 13, as long as you have a working license key. You'll need an operating system in a .iso format. That's the installer disk that you'll see, either XP, Vista, 7, 8, 10, or any Linux distribution that you want to use. So to get into your BIOS, unfortunately, there are just a massive number of computer manufacturers that are out there. Asus, Acer, Gigabyte, Aorus, which I've never heard of, Dell, ECS, MCI, Zotac, HP, Lenovo, Surface tablets, Origin PCs, Samsung, Toshibas. They all run the gambit as far as F2, F10, F12, delete, escape. Some Lenovo laptops have a BIOS button specific to Lenovo, of course. There are some combinations, there are some other ones, but for the most part, it's F2, F10, F12, and we get into our BIOS settings. And you would see, if you did this prior to checking to see if you had virtualization enabled in your BIOS, you'd see an error similar to the one we have shown here from VirtualBox AMD-V or VTX hardware acceleration not available. You can go into your BIOS to fix that through those various methods we talked about. And they'll look similar to this. We have Advanced BIOS Phoenix, even a Hewlett Packard or HP style, but we're all looking for the same thing, some sort of virtualization technology that says disabled that we need to change to enabled. And it'll tell you right here, when enabled, Virtual Machine Monitor can utilize additional hardware technologies, and will let you use virtualization software like Oracle VirtualBox or VMware Workstation, or even VMware Player, the free version of Workstation. So once it's enabled, we'll go ahead and get started. Just some image searches that we're doing. If you don't have VMware Workstation, you can get them from your various classes. You may have an instructor that has access to this. Go ahead and check with them, but look for a Cavuto, DreamSpark, or VMmap VMware site. Now, if we click on our link here, we'll pull it to a new window. This is our HCC on the hub site. If you have access, go ahead and sign in and download and register, or download and purchase. It is free, so don't worry about that. We're looking for VMware Workstation. If you don't have an account, click on register and then click on request an account. Requesting an account will let you enter your first name, last name, your W email, phone number, issue description that you don't have one. I'm not a robot, send. And within a few days or hours even, you should receive an account with instructions to log in to the Cavuto DreamSpark client software, which gets you things like Windows operating systems and VMware Workstation, which looks like this. This is VMware Workstation Pro. I have 236 days left in my period of evaluation. Now, it's a year license for most of this, and you'll need those ISOs we talked about. So I have a few operating systems that I've already downloaded. I have Windows 7 Pro, and I have Windows 7 Pro Service Pack 1. And they all run the gambit around 3-4 gigs. Windows 10 Education version I also have. It's a little bit older though, July 16. So what we'll start first is, after we've got our ISOs, we're going to create a virtual machine. I like to go through the custom, but you can also go through typical. If your operating system is recognized, you'll come up with a few various things here. One is our limitations with Virtual Machines Workstation or VMware Workstation, where the most they'll do is 8 terabytes of disk space, 10 network adapters, 16 processors, and 64 gigs of memory. That does not mean that my current machine has that. If we look at our system information, it's going to take a little while for it to pull up here. I have an i7 6th generation 4 cores, 8 logical processors. I also have 32 gigs of RAM. Right, so that's very important. However much RAM you have, plus your processor. Now the drive space technically doesn't matter because we can do a couple of things to work around that. For the most part though, if you're planning on keeping it on your laptop, drive space should be a concern for you. Now we'll need to find the ISO that we want to associate with. Now I don't have a physical drive on this laptop, so we'll find our .iso files. And that for me is in a different user account. So I'll just navigate to where I know I put it in my Windows ISOs. So we're going to do Windows 7 Service Pack 1. We're going to open that, and Windows 7 was detected, and the operating system will install using Easy Install. Now, this is handy for a few reasons. One is it'll set up a few things for you. If you have installed operating systems before, you don't want it to do easy install, you'll select I'll install it later. So when the virtual machine powers on, you'll go through the full Windows install experience, which is recommended if you've never installed Windows before, but it's pretty straightforward. Microsoft has done a pretty decent job explaining every step along the way that you need to do, like fill in username, fill in password, all that stuff, selecting drive space, everything like that. But for the most part, we're going to go with easy install because it's just a short little refresher. Now I don't have the Windows key, but I have the option because remember Windows 7 was detected, but it doesn't know that it's Pro. I know it's Pro because of my ISO. So I'll select Windows 7 Professional, and the admin name, I'm just going to call it admin, or the username. I'm not going to set a password, but if I wanted to, I could. And because Virtual Machine or VMware is so nice to you, they're going to let you enter the password automatically for you. It's nice. The product key, if you have it, you can enter it here. If you don't, it will just show up as evaluation mode, and for most labs, that's appropriate. So it will install, but must be manually activated activated later. So we'll hit yes. For our virtual machine name, Windows 7 x64, that's fine. Now here's where you can add additional functions. If you have a hard drive that is connected to your computer, this is where you would select it. Right now I have just the regular drive for the computer itself. So by default, it will go to desktop or documents and virtual machines. If that's okay, that's where it goes. I just want you to know where the actual virtual machine files are going to go. If you have a USB drive, select your USB drive, create a new folder, and put your virtual machine files inside it. So what you're going to see is documents, virtual machines, and inside each of these, they'll create the operating system that you virtualized. So here we're going to have the NVRAM, VMDK, which is the virtual machine disk, and additional disk files. And you can tell after you've installed virtual machine or VMware, you'll be able to see what they are exactly. So we'll go ahead and go through and click next. We'll leave it on BIOS. We'll change our number of processors because Windows is a slightly more demanding operating system. So 4 processors is good. Remember, I have 8 cores. And if you look, the physical limitation on my machine is 32 gigs. If I decide to take mine all the way up to 32 gigs of RAM, what will happen is it will run very slowly because all my RAM will be used virtualized, and then I won't have any RAM to run this operating system. So Windows says the recommended memory for 7 is 2 gigs. And I feel that's pretty accurate, but we're going to go ahead and bump him up just a little bit to 4. You can see the maximum amount of memory recommended is 27.7 because they expect you to be able to use a little bit. My physical machine here is Windows 10. So my host physical machine has Windows 10, which uses up a few big gigs of memory. And they say don't go over 27, but we're going to stick it to 4. Again, that is specific to my laptop. If you have something less, you need to crank your settings down a bit. Network address translation allows us to use our virtual networking, which is available in VMware Workstation. I spelled virtual. Virtual Network Editor. This is only available with Workstation, not with VMware Player. So this is an added benefit. It allows us to edit and change our network settings around a bit. So we can see our virtual net subnet from 17.0, going to use all the last octets, so it's going to be a /24. And we can change our DHCP settings to allow us more time, less time, or our range. So it's going to start at 28 and stop at 24 or 254, and a broadcast 17.255. So we have a subnet mask, starting DHCP pool addressing, and our broadcast. If you want to make any of these changes, we can add additional segments, port forwarding, and allow specific settings for NetBIOS and DNS, which you may get into later, but for the most part, we're going to leave this as is. I just wanted to show everybody the abilities to make some slight changes to this. And again, we get to see these settings. If you get into later labs, you can add as many as, what do we say? We said 10 virtual network adapters. So right now I have 3 that are being used. So I can add up to 7 more. So we'll continue on. We'll leave everything as default for our input-output controllers. Our SCSI drive is recommended. We're going to create a new virtual disk. And for the maximum disk size, they're saying the recommended disk size for Windows 7 is 60 gigabytes. Now that's going to increase your disk space usage for your virtual machine. For the most part, Windows doesn't really need a whole lot, especially Windows 7. So we'll crank him down to 20 gigs. And you can split him into a single file, or you can split him into multiple files. I prefer multiple files. It means it's a little bit faster, and it makes these files easier to move. Again, at this point in time, our virtual machines are going to go into our documents, virtual machines, and they'll show up here. If you want to change that, it doesn't do you any good to virtualize an operating system without its hard drive. So you need to, if you've set it to your D drive or USB drive, you need to select that drive. Make sure that your virtual disks are also going to that virtual drive. For my purposes here, we're just going to install it on our local machine. So we'll click Next. At this point in time, after I click Finish, it will power on and start the install process. We just need to go through a few things. So it's going to go to my Documents, Virtual Machines, using Virtual Workstation 14. Operating system is Windows 7. The hard drive is going to be 20 gig split, 4 gigs of memory, NAT, 4 CPU cores, USB controller, printer, sound card. I don't have a printer, so it doesn't do me any good. So we're going to remove that. Sometimes you'll see a floppy disk show up here as well. You can remove that. If you wanted to have sound, you could also use that as well. For the most part, I don't really care, so I'm just going to ignore that. Display will show up if you have a newer one. You can even do some graphics. If you have a new workstation, I think it's newer than 12, you can do some acceleration to 3D graphics and change your resolution, supply memory, or just let it automatically adjust. So we're going to let it automatically adjust. After this, we'll hit Finish. The virtual machine will create itself through Workstation. We'll see it show up here in our library over to the left. And then after the virtual machine is finished creating, it will power on with the virtual disk. That's the ISO that we're using in the virtual disk drive. In the past, virtual machine VMware Workstation has gotten a little sticky when it comes to that. So what I like to do, I won't be able to do it because it's creating it right now, is remove the ISO or disconnect it. And I'll show you how to do that once you have it installed. Sometimes a little toast pop-up, it comes up from the bottom up. This little down here bar will say, have you finished installing the virtual machine operating system? Or have you finished installing Windows? Or have you finished installing the operating system? If you say yes, it will sometimes remove the disk for you. If it doesn't, you can always remove it later, and I'll show you how to do that once we finish our creation here. For the most part, it's just that simple, just going through selecting, having the right settings in place prior to running Workstation. The license key you'll get from your Kavuto online store through your instructor or through Eagle Online, your learning environment. Almost done creating the disk. That's the virtual disk. And here's our virtual operating system. At any point in time, you can right click on this. So I am creating a new operating system and running my recording software at the same time. It is sort of slowing my machine down a little. It will pick back up here after it sort of catches back up. So here's a virtual machine for Windows 7. We can see that there are two segments here. Virtual machine is starting, Windows 7 install process is taking place. This is what I want to talk about real quick. These two, startup guest, shutdown guest, suspend guest, restart guest. Above this gray line, that is all virtual machine managed, VMware tool enabled or enhanced guest management power techniques. Below it is what we'll call physical techniques. If you push the power button on your laptop, desktop, if you push the power button and hold it, it turns it off. If you push the power button or close your laptop lid, it suspends. If you hold it or hit reset, the reset button, this is all physical abilities. This is all virtualized abilities. So when you click shut down, it'd be the same as if you came and clicked and chose shut down. That it only works when you have VMware VM tools on it. And again, you can see these virtual tools or virtual disk settings here. You can do it here, and it's connected, and it's connect at power on. If you start your virtual machine and it cycles and says that there's no operating system found, it cycles and says that no disk found, then these disks either don't have the ISO in the right directory, now mine's going through desktop Win ISOs, or you have it disconnected, they're not connected. I like to remove this after I install the operating system, and it'll copy those files, expand it, install, grab any updates through our NAT virtual network connection there, and on to completing installation. For the most part, everything will go pretty seamlessly. It may ask you for a little bit of information through completing installation or installing features, but for the most part, it's pretty unattended. We can see that we're installing through virtual Windows settings. After the reboot happens and installs, you'll see this pop up again. Yes, I've successfully installed the operating system, or no, I did not. Again, if you go and you look at your settings, you can see these here. And I use to physical drive. Since my laptop doesn't have a physical drive, that's just as good, but I don't have that selected anymore. Sometimes it will power on and use that ISO and try to reinstall your operating system. So if it acts like it wants to reinstall your operating system, it's because that box is checked. So you need to stop it, power it down. Don't reinstall or overwrite everything you've done, and then push that again. So at this point in time, most of the settings are pretty straightforward. What I want to go ahead and do is call attention to some of our toolbar up at the very top settings. Um, we can run some of these. They're relatively self-explanatory. Um, our virtual network editor, again, can be found through our search Windows features, or we can go to Edit Virtual Network Editor, and you can make changes there as well. For the most part, you don't really need to make any preference changes unless you have specific hotkeys you like to use. If you have specific update requests, or if you want to change any of these settings. One thing that it is worth mentioning, that right now my mouse is not inside the virtual machine. You can see the pointer and you can see my hand, but for the most part, I am not in the virtual machine. When I click inside the virtual machine, I'm inside it. When I pass my mouse up, it comes out of the virtual machine. Inside, outside, inside, outside. You can see the pointer was left behind. Sometimes your mouse gets stuck inside, so you need to hold down Control and Alt, and it will release your pointer. If you ever try to Control Alt Delete, you'll get a little notice saying that Control Alt Delete does not work for the virtual machine. To try Control Alt Insert, which is in the way here. So let me move me over to this side now. We'll do a Control Alt Delete again. And it didn't give us that option. So Control Alt Insert is the Control Alt Delete for our virtual machine. All right, so 53% done. So some extra steps to take a look at now is our bar up at the top. If you don't like the library, you can hide it. If you want the library to show on the bottom. If you want to expand to full screen, we're up here at the top, where it looks like we have just the screen itself. And if you don't like this bar up at the top, you can use the pin to unpin it and it will slide out of the way. Still sort of there, and it'll come back, but for the most part, this can be handy, especially when it's finished installing. You can actually expand your resolution to your native resolution for your physical or host machine. If you don't like this view, you can always exit full screen mode. The Unity mode gives it the appearance that it's fully, well, we have to install it, the VMware tools, gives you the ability to virtualize your operating system that looks like this. So my current settings and resolution, I think it's 1080p. We'll just go ahead and verify that real fast. So 1920 by 1080. So when my virtual machine finishes installing, that's the resolution I can set it to inside here. That will match the resolution that I am displaying right now. The benefit of that is if the resolution is too high, you'll have these scroll bars on the right and bottom side. And that means that you got to scroll around. It can be a little annoying. That's our display options. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is our snapshots, these clocks up here. If we wanted to take a snapshot at this point at 78%, 79%, we ever wanted to come back to it, we would click our snapshot. We would call it 78% install started, installing, did not finish. make some sort of note, take a snapshot. Doesn't take very long. It finished, popped up and went away. It's gone. So we can look at our snapshot settings. That's the 78% install that I made a little note on. We can protect it with a password. We can clone that snapshot. We can take additional snapshots, or we can delete that snapshot. Keep in mind that does eat up disk space. We can go to our virtual machines, Windows 7, and there's the snapshot right there. That snapshot took up 512 bytes. So it wasn't very big, but the more snapshots you take, you run the risk of potentially eating up more space. And as we go through, we're still installing. There's another snapshot at 132 megs, another snapshot of our memory at 4.9 or 4.19 gigs. So it can eat up a substantial amount of space. This is where we are right now at 83%. In the event that I wanted to go back in time, I can revert to that snapshot. It'll tell you that it's the 78% install, or I can click here and choose to go to. When I say yes, it'll go back to everything that we did from 78 or 79 to 83. So we'll go back in time to that snapshot. All right, I chose cancel because I wanted to continue going. It's kind of got our settings a little upset, but for the most part, that's how snapshot works. For the rest of the yeah, I know an error occurred. So we're continuing on. Looks like it crashed our set, so we can power it back on. It'll probably restart the install process all over again. That's okay. We will just go back to lost my snapshots. So boot manager is missing. Control Alt Delete to restart. I can't press Control Alt Delete. If I do that, it will do it for the host machine, not for the virtual machine. It was nice and tells us again, use the Control Alt Insert. So Control Alt Insert. And as we go through it, we're stuck in this sort of loop. Boot manager is missing because we didn't finish the install. And the CD drive isn't adding on to our set there. So we'll need to push back into Windows 7, hit OK, and then reinstall, finish our reinstall process. Okay, so all together we've got our play settings. This is VMware tools, sets, and then that's the same as powering on. If you wanted to go into your firmware, you could use that as well when the machine is powered off. We can adjust the virtual machine Phoenix BIOS utility. So we can see everything associated to our BIOS sets. Right, so now my pointer won't come back. That's because I have the pointer inside. I'm actually inside the physical or virtual machine. So we'll just Control Alt to release our pointer back to our virtual machine. So we have the ability to also add folders. It can help when you want to organize things a bit. So if I had Windows 7 demo, I could put it inside our folder here. If I was teaching or a student in a firewalls class, I could put all my virtual machines in a folder. Just sort of a housekeeping. So that's all we have for Workstation, how Workstation works, what Workstation does, and how to install our Workstation virtual machines. Now, for the most part, I won't go over how to install Workstation. It installs like any other program. It just requires a license. If you turn it on and it says that there's 0 days, you won't be able to start a virtual machine, connect to a remote server, open any virtual machines. You won't be able to use it at all, really. So that will be it for this.